Ethan Caldwell stood frozen in the sterile hallway of Mercy General Hospital, his polished loafers rooted to the linoleum floor. Through the glass window of the maternity ward, 4 tiny bassinets cradled newborns, their faces barely visible beneath soft blankets, but their eyes, piercing blue, sharp as the winter sky, stopped his breath. They were his eyes, unmistakable, a genetic signature he'd seen in every mirror since childhood. Yet, for over a decade, Ethan, a 34-year-old tech billionaire and white American from Boston, had believed he was sterile, a diagnosis delivered in a cold doctor's office during his sophomore year at MIT. A rare condition, they'd said, tied to a genetic quirk. He'd carried that truth like a quiet scar that shaped his relentless drive to build an empire and leave a legacy beyond flesh and blood. Now, staring at those 4 infants, each a miniature reflection of him, Ethan's calculated world unraveled. The mother was Naomi Carter, his ex-partner, a brilliant Black American software engineer whose laughter once filled their late-night coding sessions. She'd left his life 2 years ago, leaving only a handwritten note on their loft's granite counter. With its looping ends and sharp C's, her elegant script had declared she couldn't live in the shadow of his ambition. Ethan, then consumed by his startup's IPO, had let her go, burying the pain under boardroom victories and magazine covers. He'd told himself she'd found someone else, that her silence was her choice. But now, a whisper from a gala dinner, words slipped by a colleague's wife about Naomi, a hospital, and quadruplets, had ignited a spark of hope he couldn't extinguish. Ethan's hand trembled as he adjusted his tie, the silk suddenly constricting. He was no stranger to high-stakes moments, pitching to venture capitalists, facing down hostile takeovers. But this was different. This was personal, raw, a collision of past and present. The hospital's antiseptic chill seeped into his bones, amplifying the weight of his thoughts. Why hadn't Naomi told him? Had she known about the pregnancy when she left? And how, after years of accepting his infertility, could he be the father of not 1, but 4 children? The questions swirled, each one a needle pricking the armor of his composure. He stepped closer to the glass, his reflection merging with the scene inside. The ward was quiet, save for the soft hum of monitors and the occasional coo of a baby. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their scrubs a blur of blue and green. Ethan's gaze locked on the bassinets, where the infants stirred faintly. One, a girl with a wisp of dark curls, blinked up at the ceiling, her tiny fingers curling like she was grasping at dreams. Another, a boy, scrunched his nose, a familiar gesture sending a jolt through Ethan. He saw his features, the sharp jawline, the high forehead, but also traces of Naomi, her high cheekbones, the curve of her lips. The blend was undeniable, a living testament to a love he'd thought was lost. Ethan's mind raced back to the rumor that had brought him here. It was a fleeting comment at a charity gala, where champagne flowed and secrets slipped. He'd been nursing a scotch, half listening to a biotech CEO drone on about AI ethics, when the man's wife leaned in, her voice low. "Did you hear about Naomi Carter? Spotted at Mercy General with quadruplets. Can you imagine?" The words had landed like a punch, knocking the air from his lungs. He'd excused himself, feigning a call, and spent the rest of the night scouring his contacts for confirmation. A friend at the hospital, sworn to discretion, had verified it. Naomi was there, in the maternity ward, with 4 newborns, no mention of a father. Standing in this hallway, Ethan felt the weight of that truth. He didn't act impulsively. Every move in his life had been strategic, from his dorm room startup to the glass tower bearing his name. But this morning, as he'd climbed into his sleek Tesla and driven through Boston's dawn-lit streets, there was no plan, only a pull he couldn't name. The city blurred past. Brownstones, coffee shops, the Charles River glinting under early light. But his thoughts were fixed on Naomi. Her smile, fierce intellect, how she'd challenge his code and heart in the same breath. They'd met at a hackathon, two prodigies sparking over algorithms and bad pizza. They'd built a life for 3 years until his obsession with success drove a wedge between them. The diagnosis of infertility had haunted him, though he rarely spoke of it. At 19, the doctor's words had been clinical, final. Ethan had buried the grief, channeling it into his work. Naomi had known, had held him through the quiet nights when he'd admitted his fear of a future without children. She'd promised it didn't change her love, but now he wondered, had she discovered the truth about his condition? Had she carried these children alone, believing he'd reject them? The thought twisted in his gut, a mix of guilt and awe. A nurse approached, her clipboard tucked under one arm. "Sir, can I help you?" Her tone was polite but guarded, her eyes scanning his tailored suit and tense posture. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "I'm here for Naomi Carter." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "She's inside. Visiting hours end soon." She opened the door, and Ethan stepped into the ward, his heart pounding like it hadn't since his company's stock debuted on NASDAQ. Inside, Naomi stood by a bassinet, her back to him. Though tired, her dark curls were pulled into a loose bun, and her frame radiated a quiet strength. She was humming softly, her hand stroking the cheek of a sleeping infant. The sight of her, alive, real, and tethered to this new reality, hit Ethan like a wave. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, but his voice caught. Instead, he stood there, a billionaire stripped of his armor, facing a truth that could redefine everything he'd ever known. Would Naomi turn to him with anger or forgiveness? Could he step into a role he'd never imagined? And what did it mean to love not just one child, but 4, and the woman who'd carried them through silence? The answers lay just beyond that glass, in a future he hadn't dared to dream. Ethan Caldwell's Tesla glided through Boston's dawn-lit streets, the engine's hum a faint backdrop to the storm in his mind. The city was waking. Joggers along the Charles River, baristas flipping open signs. But Ethan saw none. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, as memories of Naomi Carter flooded back, each one a shard of a life he'd tried to bury. 2 years ago, she'd walked away, leaving a handwritten note that cut deeper than any boardroom loss. Now, as he sped toward Mercy General Hospital, chasing a rumor of quadruplets who bore his face, Ethan was forced to confront the past he'd spent so long outrunning. Naomi had been his equal, his spark. They'd met at a hackathon in Cambridge, two 20-somethings hunched over laptops, trading jabs about Python versus Java. Naomi, a Black American prodigy from Atlanta, had a mind as sharp as her wit, her dark eyes flashing with ideas that kept Ethan up at night. She wasn't just a coder, but a visionary. Her algorithms were elegant, and he was brute force. Their first date was a midnight diner run, debating AI ethics over greasy fries. By their second year together, they'd moved into a loft, their lives a tangle of code, coffee, and quiet promises. Ethan, a white American from a working-class Boston family, found a warmth that softened his edges in Naomi, a love that felt like home. But Ethan's ambition had been a relentless tide. His startup, Caldwell Innovations, was on the cusp of an IPO, and he'd poured everything into it, nights, weekends, pieces of himself. Naomi, then a lead engineer at a rival firm, matched his drive but craved balance. She'd slip notes into his briefcase, her loopy handwriting urging him to slow down. "Meet me for ramen, genius." He'd smile, promise to make time, then miss another dinner, another sunrise. The diagnosis of infertility, delivered when he was 19, had only fueled his hunger to build something lasting. If he couldn't have children, he'd leave a legacy in silicon and steel. Naomi had known about the diagnosis and had held him through his silent grief. But Ethan's fear of a barren future turned him inward, away from her. The breaking point came 2 years ago. Ethan had just secured a $500 million funding round. His face splashed across Forbes. He returned to their loft, expecting Naomi's proud smile, but found her note instead. "I love you, Ethan, but I can't live in your shadow. I need more than promises." Her words, inked in her signature script, were a blade. No fight, no warning, just absence. He'd called, texted, and even appeared at her favorite coffee shop, but Naomi had vanished. Friends said she'd taken a remote job and moved to a new city. Stung by rejection, Ethan told himself she'd fallen out of love. He deleted her number, boxed up her scarf, and threw himself into work, building an empire on the ashes of their life. Now, the rumor of quadruplets had shattered that narrative. Ethan's mind replayed the gala where he'd heard it, a glittering affair at the Boston Harbor Hotel. Amid clinking glasses, a colleague's wife had whispered, "Naomi Carter's at Mercy General with quadruplets." Quite the surprise, right? Ethan's scotch had trembled in his hand. He'd spent the night digging, his tech empire's resources at his fingertips. A discreet call to a hospital contact confirmed it. Naomi was there, mother to 4 newborns. No father is listed. The revelation was a paradox. His infertility diagnosis clashed with the possibility of fatherhood, and Naomi's silence raised questions he couldn't answer. As he pulled into the hospital's parking lot, Ethan's pulse raced. The building loomed, its glass facade reflecting the rising sun. He adjusted his suit jacket, a reflex from years of commanding rooms, but felt exposed. This wasn't a deal he could close with charm or data. Naomi's departure had left a wound he'd never stitched, and the thought of her raising their children alone, his children, stirred a guilt he hadn't faced. Had she discovered his condition was a misdiagnosis? Had she hidden the pregnancy to protect herself from his ambition? Or had she moved on, only for fate to pull them back together? Ethan stepped out, the morning air sharp against his skin. He remembered the last time he'd been here when Naomi had a stubborn fever 3 years ago. She'd clung to his hand, her warmth grounding him as nurses bustled. Back then, love had been effortless, a language they spoke without trying. Now, he was a stranger in her world, chasing a truth that could upend everything. The hospital doors slid open, and Ethan walked in, his polished shoes echoing in the lobby. The antiseptic smell hit him, mingling with memories of Naomi's laughter, touch, and absence. He rode the elevator to the maternity ward, staring at his reflection in the brushed steel doors. The man looking back was older, lines etched around his blue eyes, his jaw tight with tension. Success had made him untouchable, but it hadn't filled the void Naomi left. As the doors opened, he stepped into a polished corridor, the soft beep of monitors guiding him. A nurse passed, her clipboard a shield, and Ethan's resolve wavered. What would he say? Why didn't you tell me? Are they mine? Each question felt like a landmine, capable of reigniting old wounds. Then he saw the glass window of the maternity ward, the bassinets beyond it. 4 tiny lives, each a piece of him and Naomi, waited inside. Ethan's breath caught, his hand hovering near the glass. This was no longer about his empire, legacy, or pain. It was about a woman he'd loved, a truth he'd never expected, and a future that demanded he choose between the safety of his past and the risk of stepping into hers. As he stood there, heart pounding, Ethan knew one thing. Whatever lay beyond that door would change him forever. Ethan Caldwell stood at the threshold of the maternity ward, the glass door, a fragile barrier between him and a truth that could rewrite his life. The soft beep of monitors and the faint coo of infants seeped through, grounding him in the moment. His hand hovered over the handle, the weight of 2 years' silence pressing against his chest. Beyond that door was Naomi Carter, the woman who'd once been his home, now the mother of 4 newborns who bore his piercing blue eyes. Ethan, a 34-year-old tech billionaire and white American, had believed himself sterile since a college diagnosis. Yet, the sight of those quadruplets, each a blend of his sharp jaw and Naomi's high cheekbones, had shattered that certainty, pulling him to Mercy General Hospital on a thread of humor and hope. The nurse's voice broke his trance. "You're here for Ms. Carter?" she asked, her tone professional but curious, eyes flicking over his tailored suit. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, Naomi Carter." She opened the door, gesturing him inside. "She's with the babies. Keep it brief. They need rest." Ethan stepped into the ward, the antiseptic air sharp, the dim light casting soft shadows over the bassinets. His polished loafers clicked faintly, an intrusion in the quiet sanctity of the room. Then he saw her. Naomi stood by a bassinet, her dark curls spilling from a loose bun, her frame slimmer but resolute. She was humming a lullaby, her hand gently stroking the cheek of a tiny infant wrapped in a blue blanket. The sight of her, tired, radiant, utterly herself, hit Ethan like a wave, stirring memories of their shared nights, her laughter over destructive code, her warmth against him in their loft. But this Naomi was different, marked by a quiet strength he hadn't fully seen before. A Black American woman who'd faced the world alone, she carried a resilience that awed and shamed him. He took a hesitant step, and Naomi's humming stopped. She turned, her dark eyes locking onto his. For a moment, time collapsed. 2 years of pain, questions, and unspoken words hung between them. Her lips parted, her voice a whisper. "Ethan?" The sound of his name in her familiar cadence was a jolt, unraveling the composure he'd clung to. He tried to speak, but his voice caught raw and unsteady. "Naomi, are they mine?" Her gaze flickered, a storm of emotions, shock, fear, defiance, crossing her face. She straightened, crossing her arms like a shield. A long silence stretched, heavy with the weight of their past. Finally, she nodded, her movement slight but firm. "Yes, they're yours." The words landed like a thunderclap, confirming the impossible. Ethan's knees weakened, his mind reeling. The diagnosis that had defined him, the sterile future he'd accepted, dissolved in the face of 4 living truths. He was a father, not once, but 4 times over. He stepped closer, drawn to the bassinets. The infants were small and fragile, their tiny chests rising with soft breaths. One, a girl with a wisp of dark curls, blinked up at him, her blue eyes startlingly familiar. Another, a boy, scrunched his nose, a gesture Ethan saw in his childhood photos. The third and fourth, nestled side by side, had Naomi's full lips and his high forehead. The blend of their features was a mirror, a bridge between their fractured past and this uncharted present. Ethan's hand pressed against the glass of a bassinet, his breath uneven. "How?" he managed, his voice barely audible. "I thought, the doctor said I couldn't." Naomi's expression softened, but her arms remained crossed. "I didn't know either, not at first," she said, her voice low, measured. When I found out I was pregnant, I had tests done. They said it was rare, a misdiagnosis on your part years ago. Something about viable counts they missed. She paused, her eyes searching his. I tried to reach you, Ethan, but you were gone, buried in your empire. I couldn't compete with that. Her words stung each one, a reminder of his absence. Ethan's mind flashed to the months after their breakup, his phone buzzing with her calls, ignored as he chased deals, her texts deleted in a haze of pride. He'd assumed she'd moved on, but she'd been carrying their children, facing a high-risk pregnancy alone. The guilt was a vice tightening around his heart. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice cracking. After you had realized that, why keep this from me? Naomi's jaw tightened, her eyes glistening but resolute. Because I didn't want you to come back out of obligation, she said. I didn't want to be your duty, Ethan. I wanted you to choose me, us, because you cared, not because of a test result or a sense of responsibility. Her voice wavered, betraying the pain beneath her strength. I was scared. A black woman, pregnant with quadruplets, no partner, no safety net. People judged and whispered. I had to protect myself and them. Ethan's chest ached, her words painting a picture of a solitude he'd never imagined. He saw her now, not just the woman he'd loved, but a mother who'd fought for her children against odds he couldn't fathom. The hospital room felt smaller, the air thick with their shared history and her unspoken sacrifices. He wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap, but her guarded stance held him back. I didn't know, he said, his voice hoarse. Naomi, I swear, if I'd known. She shook her head, cutting him off. She said you didn't know because you weren't there. Not cruelly, but with a clarity that pierced. And I didn't know if you'd ever be. The truth hung between them, raw and unyielding. Ethan's eyes drifted to the babies. Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, Caleb, names he'd later learn. Each a piece of their love, now a challenge to his identity. He'd built an empire. But could he make a family? Could he earn Naomi's trust after failing her once? A nurse approached her clipboard with a quiet interruption. Carter said that the babies needed their feeding soon, glancing at Ethan with polite curiosity. Naomi nodded, her focus shifting back to the bassinet. I'll handle it, she said, her voice steady again. She looked at Ethan, her expression unreadable. You can stay, but this isn't about you right now. It's about them. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. He stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes lingered on the infants. The girl, Lila, stirred, her tiny hand curling in the air. Ethan felt something shift at that moment, a pull stronger than any deal or ambition. He wasn't sure what came next, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Not again. As Naomi prepared a bottle, her movements practiced and tender, Ethan stood at the edge of her world, a billionaire stripped bare, facing a truth that demanded more than money or power. It demanded his heart. Naomi Carter stood by the bassinet, her fingers tracing the edge of Lila's blanket, the soft rhythm of her daughter's breathing a fragile anchor in the storm of Ethan Caldwell's presence. The maternity ward of Mercy General Hospital was a cocoon of quiet, but inside Naomi, a tempest raged. Ethan, the man she'd loved and left, stood just feet away, his blue eyes, now mirrored in their 4 newborns, searching her for answers. His question was, "Why didn't you tell me?" Echoed in her mind. Each word was a reminder of her choices and the battles she'd fought alone. As a Black American woman, a software engineer, and now a mother of quadruplets, Naomi had carried a weight Ethan could only begin to grasp. This moment, their first in 2 years, demanded the truth. But the truth was a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Naomi's gaze drifted to the infants, Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, Caleb, each a miracle born from a pregnancy she'd barely believed possible. When she'd left Ethan, she hadn't known she was pregnant. Their breakup, etched in her loopy handwriting on a note left in their Boston loft, had been a desperate act of self-preservation. Ethan's ambition, his relentless drive to build Caldwell Innovations, had consumed him, leaving her to love a shadow. As a black woman in tech, Naomi knew sacrifice. She'd clawed her way through MIT and navigated boardrooms where her voice was often dismissed. But she couldn't sacrifice her heart. Leaving Ethan had broken her, but it had also freed her to rebuild. The discovery of her pregnancy came weeks later, a faint line on a test that upended her world. At the clinic, the doctor's words were a blur. Quadruplets. High risk. Naomi, then 31, sat alone, her hands trembling. Tests revealed Ethan's infertility diagnosis had been wrong, a rare oversight in his college-era results. Her first instinct was to call him, to share the impossible news, but his silence after her departure, ignored calls, unanswered texts, had hardened her resolve. She'd seen his face on magazine covers, his empire soaring while she faded from his life. Would he return for her or duty? The question haunted her, and fear won. She chose silence. Pregnancy was a crucible. Naomi moved to a modest apartment, leaving her high-flying tech job for freelance work to manage her health. As a black single mother-to-be, she faced scrutiny at every turn. Sideways glances in grocery stores, skeptical questions at doctors' visits. "Where's the father?" a nurse once asked, her tone sharp. Naomi's smile had been tight, her answer vague. Society's judgment was a constant hum, amplified by the rarity of her quadruplets. Medical bills piled up, her savings dwindled, and sleepless nights blurred into days. Yet, she pressed on, driven by a fierce love for the lives growing inside her. She sang to them, coded through pain, and whispered promises of a better future. In the hospital room, Naomi faced Ethan, his presence a collision of past and present. His guilt was palpable, his tailored suit out of place amid the bassinets. She wanted to believe the man before she was different, but trust was a fragile thing, shattered by his absence. "You don't understand what it was like," she said, her voice low, steady despite the ache in her chest. "I was alone, Ethan. 4 babies, 4 heartbeats, and no one to lean on. I had to be everything: mother, provider, protector. I couldn't risk you coming back to check a box." Ethan's face crumpled, his hand hovering near Isaiah's bassinet. "I would have been there," he said, his voice raw. "If you'd told me, I would have dropped everything." Naomi's eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. "Would you? You were building an empire. I was just collateral." Her words cut, not out of malice, but from a truth she'd lived. Ethan flinched his silence and admission. He'd been consumed by success, blind to her fading light. Naomi turned to Zoe, adjusting her tiny hat, her movements deliberate. "I thought about telling you," she continued, softer now. "When I was 6 months along, I almost did. I drove to your office and sat in the parking lot, watching you through the glass. You were on a call, pacing, constantly pacing. I realized then, you weren't mine anymore. You belonged to your world. I couldn't bring these babies into that." Ethan's breath hitched, his eyes fixed on Caleb, who stirred faintly. "I failed you," he said, the words heavy. "But I'm here now, Naomi. I see them and you, and I'm not walking away." His sincerity was a spark, But Naomi's heart was guarded. She'd survived too much to trust easily. "Seeing isn't enough," she said. "You have to show up, Ethan. Not for a day or a headline. For them, for real." The nurse reappeared, her clipboard a quiet signal. "Ms. Carter, it's time for the next feeding," she said. Naomi nodded, reaching for a bottle with practiced ease. Ethan watched, his hands empty, his billionaire status useless here. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice tentative. Naomi hesitated, her instinct to protect her children, warring with the flicker of hope in his eyes. Finally, she handed him a bottle, pointing to Isaiah. "Hold it steady, not too fast." She instructed, her tone firm but not unkind. As Ethan cradled the bottle, his hands shaking slightly, Naomi watched, her heart tangled with fear and possibility. This man, once her everything, was a stranger now, yet the father of her children. Could he learn to be more than a name on a birth certificate? Could she let him try without losing herself again? The baby's soft gulps filled the silence, a fragile bridge between their broken past and an uncertain future. Naomi didn't have answers, but for the first time, she felt the weight of her solitude lift, if only a fraction. Ethan was here, and that was a start, but only a start. Ethan Caldwell stood in the dim light of Mercy General's maternity ward, a feeding bottle trembling as he tilted it toward Isaiah's tiny lips. The infant's soft gulps were a lifeline, anchoring Ethan in a role he'd never imagined, father to four. Across the room, Naomi Carter watched, her dark eyes guarded but curious, her arms folded over her worn sweatshirt. The air between them crackled with unspoken questions, a fragile truce forged after her raw confession about the pregnancy she'd faced alone. Ethan, a 34-year-old tech billionaire and white American, had built an empire with precision. But here, cradling his son, he was a novice, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the chaos of fatherhood. Naomi, a Black American software engineer and mother of their quadruplets, had given him this chance, not out of trust, but as a test. The hospital room was a microcosm of their new reality. 4 bassinets lined the wall, each holding a piece of their shared DNA, tiny, fragile, and demanding. Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb. Ethan's first attempt at feeding was clumsy. Milk dribbled down Isaiah's chin, and the infant squirmed, his cry sharp. Naomi stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Angle it higher, Ethan. He's not latching right." Her instruction was a bridge, small but deliberate, and Ethan adjusted, his hands steadier. When Isaiah settled, a flicker of pride warmed him, but Naomi's expression remained unreadable. She'd carried these children through judgment and fear. A single feeding didn't erase that. Ethan stayed through the night, trading his penthouse for a stiff hospital chair. The nurses, accustomed to Naomi's quiet efficiency, raised eyebrows at his presence, but said nothing. He watched her closely, how she swaddled Zoe with practiced ease and soothed Caleb's fussing with a gentle hum. Naomi was a force, her resilience forged in the crucible of a high-risk pregnancy and societal scrutiny. As a Black single mother, she'd navigated a world that often questioned her strength. Yet here she was, unwavering. Ethan, whose world revolved around boardrooms and algorithms, felt humbled, acutely aware of the gap between his privilege and her reality. Caring for quadruplets was relentless. The babies operated on staggered schedules. When Lila slept, Caleb wailed, and Zoe needed a diaper change when Isaiah fed. Ethan fumbled through tasks, his fingers awkward with burp cloths and pacifiers. One moment stood out, Attempting to change Lila's diaper, he misjudged the tape, and the diaper slipped, earning a soft chuckle from a nurse. "First time?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his face flushed. Naomi, rocking Zoe nearby, didn't laugh, but her eyes softened, a fleeting sign of patience. These small failures stung, but Ethan pressed on, driven by the weight of Naomi's words. Show up for them. For real. Sleep was a luxury neither could afford. Ethan's eyes burned by the second night, and his body aching from hours in the chair. Battling postpartum fatigue, Naomi moved with a weary grace, her strength a silent rebuke to his past absence. Tensions flared when Ethan, exhausted, mixed up the baby's feeding charts. "You can't just guess, Ethan," Naomi snapped, her voice low to avoid waking Zoe. "They're not a startup, but you can pivot." Her frustration was a mirror, reflecting the stakes of their new reality. Ethan apologized, his voice quiet. "I'm learning, Naomi. I'm trying." She nodded, but her silence spoke volumes. Trying wasn't enough. Consistency was. The hospital's social worker visited, and her clipboard was filled with questions about support systems and resources. "Quadruplets are a marathon," she said, glancing at Naomi, then Ethan. "You'll need help from family, friends, and maybe hired support." Naomi's jaw tightened. Her family was in Atlanta, and friends had drifted during her pregnancy. Ethan, whose wealth could solve most problems, offered to hire a nanny, but Naomi shook her head. "This isn't about money," she said. "It's about us figuring this out." Her words were a challenge, one Ethan accepted, though the weight of it daunted him. Boston's tech world buzzed outside, unaware of Ethan's transformation. His assistant texted, urgent about a board meeting, but Ethan ignored it, focusing on Caleb's tiny hand curling around his finger. The babies were a revelation. Each cry, each blink, a tether to a purpose beyond profit. Yet, Naomi's trust remained elusive. One evening, as she fed Lila, she spoke, her voice soft but piercing. "I don't know if I can let you in, Ethan. Not yet. I've been there everything. You're just new." Her honesty cut, but Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll earn it," he said, meeting her gaze for them and you. The hospital's fluorescent lights dimmed, and the babies slept, their breaths a soft chorus. Ethan stood by Isaiah's bassinet, watching his son's chest rise and fall. Naomi sat nearby, her eyes heavy but vigilant. Their distance was more than physical, a chasm of hurt and time. Yet, at this moment, sharing the quiet chaos of 4 newborns, Ethan felt a spark of possibility. He wasn't the man who'd let her go, not anymore. But proving that would take more than words, presence, patience, and a willingness to fail and try again. As Naomi's eyes met his, a silent question lingered. Could he be the father these children needed? The partner she deserved? Ethan didn't have the answer, but knew he'd stay to find it. Ethan Caldwell sat on the worn couch in Naomi Carter's cramped Boston apartment, a half-empty bottle of formula in one hand and a burp cloth slung over his shoulder. The air smelled of baby powder and coffee, the faint hum of a white noise machine blending with the soft cries of quadruplets. Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb. 2 weeks had passed since Ethan, a 34-year-old tech billionaire and white American, left the sterile safety of Mercy General's maternity ward to join Naomi in her world. His tailored suits were now folded in a corner, replaced by jeans and a t-shirt stained with spit-up. Naomi, a Black American software engineer and mother to their 4 newborns, moved through the chaos with weary precision, her dark curls tied back, her eyes heavy with postpartum fatigue. The transition from hospital to home was a crucible, testing Ethan's resolve and Naomi's guarded trust. The one-bedroom apartment, with peeling paint and a single window, was a far cry from Ethan's waterfront penthouse. Bottles cluttered the counter, diapers spilled from an overflowing bin, and 4 cribs squeezed into the living room left little space to breathe. The quadruplets were relentless. Lila's piercing wail woke Isaiah, whose fussing roused Zoe, and Caleb's hunger kept the cycle spinning. Ethan, once the master of boardroom crises, was out of his depth. His first night, he'd fumbled a swaddle, earning a sharp look from Naomi. "Tighter, Ethan, or she'll wiggle out," she'd said, her tone clipped. He'd adjusted, sweat beading on his brow, but the learning curve was steep, and Naomi's patience was thin. Sleep was a ghost. Ethan and Naomi took shifts, but the baby's staggered needs blurred day into night. Ethan's hands shook from exhaustion by the 3rd day, his eyes red-rimmed. Naomi, battling the haze of postpartum recovery, was a study in endurance, but cracks showed. One morning, when Ethan left a bottle unsterilized, she snapped, "You can't skip steps, Ethan. They're not forgiving like your investors." Her voice trembled with anger and the weight of carrying 4 lives alone for so long. Ethan, stung, murmured an apology, his voice hoarse. "I'm trying, Naomi. I'm here." She nodded, but her silence was a wall built from years of his absence. The real world pressed in. Naomi's freelance coding gigs, her lifeline during pregnancy, had dried up, and her savings were nearly gone. Ethan offered to cover expenses, but Naomi bristled. "I don't need your charity," she said, her eyes fierce. "I need a partner, not a checkbook." Her words echoed her fear that Ethan's wealth would overshadow her independence, reducing her to a footnote in his story. As a black woman, Naomi had fought for every inch of her autonomy in a tech world that often sidelined her. Ethan, whose privilege had smoothed his path, began to see the depth of her struggle, not just as a mother, but as a survivor of a system stacked against her. Tensions flared over minor things, whose turn it was to wash bottles, how to soothe Caleb's colic, whether to use cloth or disposable diapers. One night, exhausted and frayed, Ethan misread Zoe's cry, offering a bottle when she needed a diaper change. Naomi, rocking Isaiah, let out a sharp sigh. "You have to listen to them, Ethan. Listen." Her frustration was a mirror, reflecting his inexperience and her fear of relying on someone who'd once let her down. Ethan took a breath, set the bottle down, and changed Zoe, his movements slow but deliberate. "I'm learning," he said, meeting her gaze. Naomi's expression softened for the first time, a flicker of belief breaking through her doubt. Community whispers added pressure. Curious about the white billionaire in their modest building, neighbors speculated loudly in the laundry room. "Is he the dad? Or just playing hero?" one asked, unaware Naomi was nearby. She'd returned to the apartment, her jaw tight, and told Ethan, "People talk. They always do. I've dealt with it, but you're new to this." Her words highlighted their different worlds. Ethan, shielded by wealth and whiteness, was now stepping into the scrutiny Naomi had endured as a black single mother. He didn't argue, just nodded, absorbing the lesson. Ethan's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, urgent board meetings, a faltering deal in Singapore. But he silenced it, his focus on the babies. Lila's first smile, fleeting but radiant, felt like a victory worth more than any stock surge. Yet Naomi's trust remained a distant shore. One evening, as they sat amid scattered toys, she spoke, her voice low. "You're doing better, Ethan. But this isn't a sprint. It's a lifetime. I need to know you won't bail when it gets harder." Her honesty was a gauntlet, and Ethan felt its weight. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady. "I lost you once." I won't lose them. Or you. Again. The apartment grew quiet, and the babies finally fell asleep, their breaths a soft rhythm. Naomi stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the city's glow. Ethan joined her, keeping a respectful distance. The space between them was still vast, but there was a spark of partnership in the shared exhaustion. The small victories, Isaiah's calmed cries, Zoe's clean diaper. Ethan didn't know if Naomi would ever fully let him in, but he knew he'd fight for it. One bottle, one cry, one sleepless night at a time. As dawn crept through the blinds, Ethan felt the truth settle. This chaotic, crowded life was where he belonged, if only he could prove it. Ethan Caldwell rocked Caleb gently in the dim glow of Naomi Carter's cramped Boston apartment. The infant's soft breaths, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Ethan's mind. 8 months had passed since he'd entered the chaotic fatherhood world, trading boardroom battles for bottles and burp cloths. The Quadruplets, Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb, filled the tiny space with cries and coos, their cribs a makeshift fortress in the living room. Naomi, a Black American software engineer, and their mother moved with quiet resilience, her dark eyes tracking Ethan's every move. Their relationship, once fractured, had grown into a fragile partnership forged through sleepless nights and shared struggles. But now, the outside world, Ethan's tech empire, demanded his return, threatening to pull him from the family he'd fought to join. Ethan, a 34-year-old white American billionaire, had become a fixture in Naomi's modest home, a stark shift from his penthouse days. He'd learned the baby's rhythms, Lila's need for extra rocking, Isaiah's colicky evenings, and earned tentative trust from Naomi. Yet, his absence from Caldwell Innovations had consequences. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Missed calls from his CFO, urgent emails about a faltering Singapore deal, and texts from his assistant Claire, pleading for his input. The board's restless, she'd written. Clients are jumping ship. Ethan had ignored it all, focusing on the baby's first smiles. But the pressure was mounting, a ticking clock he couldn't silence. The call came on a gray morning as Ethan changed Zoe's diaper, his hands now steady after months of practice. Harold Dean, his mentor and chairman of a partner firm, didn't mince words. Ethan, you've ghosted the industry for months. His voice crackled through the speaker. I get it. Family's important. But we've got a crisis. The Paris AI Summit needs you. 1 week, your jet's ready. Say yes, and we'll handle the rest. Ethan froze, Zoe's tiny hand gripping his finger. Paris was a career-defining chance, a platform to cement his legacy. But it meant leaving Naomi and the babies, breaking the fragile rhythm they'd built. Naomi, feeding Lila across the room, caught his silence. Who was that? She asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. Ethan hesitated, setting Zoe in her crib. Harold. He wants me to go to Paris for a summit. A big opportunity. Naomi's jaw tightened, her hands pausing on Lila's bottle. And? She said, her voice low. Ethan met her gaze, his heart caught between worlds. I haven't decided, he admitted. Her silence was louder than any argument, a reminder of the man he'd been, always chasing the next deal, leaving her behind. The apartment felt smaller as the day wore on. The babies were fussy, and Caleb's teething added to the chaos. Ethan and Naomi moved in sync, changing diapers, warming bottles. But tension hung heavy. Ethan's mind churned. Paris could stabilize his company, secure jobs for thousands, and quiet the board's doubts. But every glance at Naomi, her weary strength as she soothed Isaiah, reminded him of the cost. She'd raised their children alone, facing judgment as a Black single mother, while he'd built an empire. Could he risk her trust now when they were beginning to heal? Naomi spoke that night after the baby slept, her voice cutting through the quiet. "If you go, I won't stop you," she said, folding a onesie with deliberate care. "But I need to know you're choosing us, not just filling a gap until your successive big win." Her words mirror Ethan's old self, the man who'd prioritized success over love. He saw her fear, not of abandonment, but of losing the partner he was becoming. "I don't want to go," he said, his voice raw. "But I'm scared of letting everything I built collapse. It's not just me, the people who depend on it." Naomi's eyes softened, but her resolve held. "You built this family too, Ethan. Which matters more?" The question was a blade slicing through his indecision. He thought of the boardroom, the flashing cameras, the weight of his name. Then he thought of Caleb's tiny hand, Lila's smile, and Naomi's quiet courage. The choice was clear, but it wasn't easy. By dawn, Ethan made his decision. He called Harold, his voice steady. "I'm not going. I'll work remotely and delegate more. My place is here." Harold sighed, disappointed, but resigned. "You're changing the game, Caldwell. I hope it's worth it." Ethan hung up, his gaze falling on Naomi. As he was asleep on the couch, Zoe curled against her. He drafted a post for his social media, fingers trembling. "Success isn't power or titles. It's showing up for those who need you most. I'm where I belong." He hit send, knowing the world would judge. Some would praise, others mock. But Naomi's trust was the only metric that mattered. As sunlight crept through the blinds, Naomi stirred, her eyes finding his. She'd seen the post, her phone glowing in her hand. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't look away. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice thick. Ethan nodded, stepping closer. "I'm done running." The babies stirred their cries, a soft call to action. Ethan and Naomi rose together, ready for another day in their chaotic, beautiful life, a step closer to something whole. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Naomi Carter's Boston apartment, casting soft stripes across the cluttered living room, where 4 cribs stood like sentinels. Once a titan of tech, Ethan Caldwell knelt beside Lila's crib, humming a clumsy lullaby as the infant gripped his finger. 8 months into fatherhood, the 34-year-old white American billionaire had traded boardroom bravado for burp cloths, his jeans now as familiar as his old suits. Naomi, a black American software engineer and mother to their quadruplets, Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb, watched from the kitchen, her dark curls loose, her eyes softer than they'd been in weeks. Ethan's decision to reject a Paris summit, choosing family over ambition, had shifted something in her, a crack in the wall she'd built since their breakup 2 years ago. But trust was a slow bloom, like love, and Naomi wasn't ready to let it flower. The apartment was a battlefield of baby gear, bottles on the counter, diapers stacked precariously, a white noise machine humming faintly. The quadruplets, now stronger but no less demanding, kept Ethan and Naomi in constant motion. Caleb's teething wails woke Zoe, whose cries roused Isaiah, and Lila's hunger completed the chorus. Ethan had grown adept, his hands steady as he swaddled Isaiah or warmed a bottle, but mistakes lingered. One night, he'd misjudged Caleb's formula mix, earning a sharp correction from Naomi. "Too much water throws off his stomach," she'd said, her tone firm but less biting than before. Ethan nodded, adjusting quickly, and Naomi's brief nod felt like a small victory, a sign she saw his effort. His life with quadruplets was a grind. Sleep came in stolen naps, and the apartment's thin walls amplified every cry. Naomi, still navigating postpartum fatigue, bore the brunt, her body and mind stretched thin. As a black single mother, she'd faced scrutiny long before Ethan's return. Whispers in grocery stores, skeptical glances at clinics. Now, with Ethan's presence, neighbors gossiped louder. "He's that tech guy. What's he doing here?" one said in the hallway, unaware Naomi had overheard. She'd returned, her jaw tight, and told Ethan they'd talk no matter what. "I'm used to it." Her words underscored their different realities. Ethan's wealth and whiteness shielded him from the judgment she'd endured alone. Ethan's world, too, was shifting. His social media post, "Success is showing up for those needing you most," marked a firestorm. Tech blogs praised his humanity. Critics called him reckless, citing Caldwell Innovations' dipping stock. Employees whispered about his absence, and the board demanded a meeting. Ethan delegated, working remotely during nap times, but the strain showed. One evening, as he rocked Zoe, his phone buzzed with a scathing email from a shareholder. Naomi noticed his tension. "Your empire's calling," she said, half teasing, half probing. Ethan sighed, setting the phone down. "It can wait." "They can't," he said, nodding at Zoe. Naomi's faint smile was a rare gift, a sign she believed him, if only for now. Their partnership grew in small moments. When Isaiah's fever spiked, they took turns cooling his brow, their hands brushing in the dim light. When Lila rolled over for the first time, they laughed a shared joy that felt like their old selves. But Naomi held back, her heart scarred by Ethan's past absence. One night, as they collapsed on the couch, babies finally asleep, she spoke, her voice low. "You're trying, Ethan. I see it. But I've been there everything, me alone, through every scare, every bill. Letting you in feels like risking it all again." Her honesty was a knife, not cruel but precise. Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. "I know I can't undo the past, but I'm here, Naomi, for every cry, every fight. I'll keep showing up." Her words lingered, a challenge and a door. Ethan rose to it, learning the baby's quirks, Caleb's love for soft humming, Zoe's need for a gentle sway. He took on midnight feedings, letting Naomi rest, though she rarely slept, her vigilance a habit born of necessity. The community noticed that neighbors had stopped gossiping and offered casseroles instead. A nurse from the hospital, a black woman who'd seen Naomi struggle, dropped by with advice. "You're a team now," she told them, eyeing Ethan. "Keep it real." Her words resonated, a reminder of the stakes beyond their walls. Boston's spring brought warmth and, with it, a shift. One afternoon, as Ethan pushed a stroller through the park, Naomi walked beside him, her guard lowering. They stopped by a pond, the babies cooing at ducks. "You could have gone to Paris," she said, her voice soft. "Most would have." Ethan looked at her, the sun catching her curls. "Most don't have you or them," he said. Naomi's eyes glistened, and she reached for his hand for the first time, her touch tentative but warm. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was faith, a leap she hadn't dared take before. The moment was fleeting, broken by Caleb's wail, but it lingered in Ethan's heart. Back home, as they tackled another round of feedings, Naomi's laughter at Isaiah's messy burp felt new, unguarded. The apartment, once a cage of chaos, was becoming a home, its walls holding their shared effort. Ethan knew trust was a marathon, not a sprint, but Naomi's hand in his, and her rare smiles proved he was on the right path. As night fell, the babies breathing a soft rhythm, Ethan stood by the cribs, Naomi beside him. The world outside, its deals, its noise, faded. In this crowded, imperfect space, was everything he'd ever need if he could keep earning it. The late spring light spilled into Naomi Carter's Boston apartment, warming the cluttered living room where 4 cribs stood like anchors in a sea of baby gear. Ethan Caldwell, once a tech titan commanding glass towers, now sat cross-legged on the floor, stacking foam blocks with Zoe, her tiny hands swatting at his creation. 9 months into fatherhood, the 34-year-old white American billionaire had shed his polished veneer, his jeans flecked with mashed peas, his blue eyes bright with a purpose beyond profit. Naomi, a Black American software engineer and mother to their quadruplets, Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb, leaned against the kitchen counter, her dark curls loose, a rare smile on her lips. Ethan's choice to stay, to reject the world's applause for their chaotic, beautiful life, had softened her guard, weaving a fragile thread of trust between them. The apartment was a testament to their shared struggle. Bottles lined the sink, diapers overflowed the bin, and a white noise machine hummed softly, barely muffling the baby's cries. Now rolling and babbling, the quadruplets were a whirlwind. Lila's fierce giggles, Isaiah's curious grabs, Zoe's fearless tumbles, and Caleb's stubborn refusal to nap. Ethan and Naomi had found a rhythm, but it was hard-won. Exhaustion clung to them like a second skin, their nights fractured by feedings and fevers. One evening, when Caleb's ear infection kept them up, Naomi slumped against Ethan, her head on his shoulder. "We're surviving," she murmured, and he squeezed her hand, a silent vow to keep going. Parenting quadruplets tested their limits. Still grappling with postpartum fatigue, Naomi juggled motherhood with freelance coding to rebuild her savings. As a Black woman, she'd faced skepticism in tech and society. Her strength forged in solitude. Ethan's presence eased the load, but also stirred fear. Could she depend on him without losing herself? Ethan, too, was stretched thin, answering urgent emails during nap times, and his company was teetering under his absence. Yet, he prioritized the babies, mastering their quirks. Lila loved being swayed left, and Isaiah needed a specific blanket. His mistakes, overheating a bottle, misreading a rash, were fewer, but Naomi's corrections, once sharp, now carried a gentler edge, a sign of her growing faith. Their bond deepened in stolen moments. One afternoon, as they cleaned up a formula spill, their laughter echoed, a sound from their old life. When Zoe took her first shaky crawl, Ethan scooped her up, spinning her until Naomi joined, their joy a bridge over past hurts. But shadows lingered. One night, after a long day of teething tantrums, Naomi sat on the couch, her eyes distant. "I'm scared, Ethan," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I've been their whole world. I can rebuild if I let you in, and you leave again." Her vulnerability was a gift, raw and unguarded. Ethan knelt before her, his voice steady. "I'm not that man anymore, Naomi. I'm here, for every mess, every milestone. You're not alone." Her words stayed with him, a call to prove himself. Ethan took on more, waking for midnight feedings so Naomi could sleep, though she often stirred, her instinct to protect unbroken. He learned to anticipate her needs, brewing coffee before she asked and folding laundry during lulls. Naomi noticed her gratitude, which was shown in small gestures, a touch on his arm and a shared glance over Isaiah's sleepy smile. The community saw it too. Neighbors, once skeptical of the billionaire in their midst, now nodded warmly, and the hospital nurse who'd counseled them sent a care package, her note reading, "You're making it work. Keep going." Their approval, though small, felt like a milestone, especially for Naomi, who'd faced judgment as a Black single mother. Society's gaze widened. Ethan's post about choosing family had rippled, sparking debates in tech circles. Some lauded his redefinition of success. Others, including a biting Forbes op-ed, called him a cautionary tale of misplaced priorities. The board pressed harder, scheduling a meeting Ethan couldn't ignore. He joined via video, the baby's cries in the background, and calmly outlined his plan: part-time remote work and delegated leadership. The CFO scoffed, but Ethan held firm, his resolve rooted in the life he was building. Naomi, overhearing, later said, "You're different now." Her heavy but straightforward words were a turning point, a crack in her armor. One evening, as spring turned to summer, Naomi found Ethan asleep on the nursery floor, Lila curled against his chest, a half-read board book in his hand. She paused, her heart catching. This man, who'd once chased headlines, was present in the quiet chaos she'd carried alone. She draped a blanket over him, her fingers lingering on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, a confession of trust, of hope. When Ethan stirred, catching her gaze, he smiled, his voice soft. "For them, for you, always." Naomi knelt beside him, their hands brushing over Lila's tiny form, a silent promise to keep building together. Once a cage, the apartment felt warmer, its walls holding their shared laughter and tears. The baby's babbling filled the air, a soundtrack to a love rekindling not in grand gestures, but in consistency. Ethan's steady presence, Naomi's cautious opening. They weren't whole yet, but they were closer, each day a step toward something lasting. As night fell, the city's hum, a distant echo. Ethan and Naomi stood by the cribs, their shoulders touching. The road ahead was long, but at this moment, they were enough. A family, imperfect but fighting, ready for whatever came next. The summer heat pressed against the windows of Naomi Carter's Boston apartment, where the hum of a fan mingled with the babbling of quadruplets: Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb. Ethan Caldwell, once a tech billionaire defined by glass towers, now sat at a cluttered table, his laptop open but ignored as he bounced Isaiah on his knee. 10 months into fatherhood, the 34-year-old white American had traded ambition for presence, his jeans stained with apple puree, his blue eyes soft with devotion. Naomi, a black American software engineer and mother to their 4 children, stood in the kitchen, her dark curls pulled back, a cautious warmth in her gaze. Ethan's choice to prioritize family, cemented by his public rejection of a Paris summit, had deepened their bond. But trust was a slow dance, and Naomi's steps were still measured. The apartment, a cramped haven of cribs and chaos, bore the marks of their shared life. Bottles crowded the counter, toys spilled across the floor, and 4 high chairs lined the wall like a tiny boardroom. Now nearing their first birthday, the Quadruplets. The Quadruplets were a whirlwind of milestones. Lila's first wobbly steps, Zoe's infectious giggles, Isaiah's stubborn grabs for spoons, and Caleb's quiet stares. Ethan and Naomi moved in sync, but the grind was unrelenting. Sleep was scarce, and Naomi's postpartum fatigue lingered, her body weary from months of solo parenting. As a black woman, she'd faced societal judgment. Whispers about her billionaire baby daddy still circulated in the neighborhood, but Ethan's steady presence dulled their sting. Ethan had grown into fatherhood, his once clumsy hands now deft at diaper changes and soothing cries. He knew each child's needs: Lila's love for soft blankets, Caleb's need for extra cuddles, and took on night shifts to ease Naomi's load. But the world outside pressed in. Caldwell Innovations teetered, and its stock has been volatile since Ethan's shift to remote work. Shareholders grumbled, and his assistant, Claire, sent daily pleas for his return. Naomi, too, faced pressure, her freelance coding barely covering bills. Yet, she refused Ethan's offers of financial help, her independence, a shield. "We're partners, not your project," she'd said, her voice firm but not unkind. One evening, as the babies slept, Ethan unveiled a plan. He'd spent weeks consulting lawyers, restructuring his assets. Sitting across from Naomi, he slid a folder toward her. "I've updated my trust," he said, his voice steady. "The apartment's in your name and fully paid. College funds are set for the kids, and there's a separate fund for you to build your dreams, whether coding, a nonprofit, or anything. No strings." Naomi's eyes widened, her fingers tracing the documents. "Why?" she asked, her voice thick. Ethan met her gaze. "Because I love you, Naomi. Not to own you, but to give you freedom. You've carried them alone. You deserve stability on your terms." Her silence was heavy, not with doubt, but with awe. As a black woman who'd fought for every inch of autonomy, Naomi had never expected this, a gesture that honored her strength, not her need. Tears welled, but she didn't look away. She said, "You're not the man I left," her voice soft. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I'm the man you always saw in me." The moment was a turning point, a vow deeper than words. Naomi reached for his hand. She touched the bridge over years of hurt and let herself lean into him just a little for the first time. Parenting challenges persisted. Isaiah's first ear infection tested their patience, with sleepless nights and frantic calls to the pediatrician. Zoe's fearless crawling led to a bruised knee, her wails breaking Naomi's heart. Ethan and Naomi argued over nap schedules and formula brands, but their fights were shorter, resolved with apologies and tired hugs. Community support grew. Neighbors dropped off meals, and the hospital nurse, Miss Lena, visited, praising their teamwork. "You're a unit now," she said, her smile warm. Her words, rooted in her experience as a black mother, resonated, especially with Naomi, who'd once felt so alone. The tech world watched, too. Ethan's choice to prioritize family sparked a broader conversation, panels on work-life balance, and articles about the new masculinity. Some investors pulled out, but others, inspired, doubled down. Naomi, emboldened by Ethan's trust fund, began sketching a nonprofit to mentor underrepresented coders, her passion reigniting. Their partnership, once fragile, felt solid, built on mutual respect. One night, as they sat amid scattered toys, Naomi looked at Ethan, her voice steady. "I'm starting to love you again," she said, the words a quiet thunder. Ethan's heart swelled. "I never stopped," he replied, his hand finding hers. The apartment glowed with their shared effort. Cribs polished by Ethan, walls adorned with Naomi's sketches for her nonprofit. The babies' louder laughter filled the space, a testament to their survival. They weren't perfect. Exhaustion sparked tempers, and trust was still a work in progress. But they were whole, a family forged in the fire of choice and presence. As summer deepened, Ethan and Naomi stood by the cribs, their hands entwined, watching their children dream. The future was uncertain, but at this moment, they were building a legacy not of wealth, but of love, one day at a time. The golden hues of a Boston summer evening bathed Naomi Carter's apartment, where the laughter of quadruplets, Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb, mingled with the hum of a city winding down. Once a tech billionaire commanding global markets, Ethan Caldwell stood on the tiny balcony, a velvet box heavy in his pocket. 11 months into fatherhood, the 34-year-old white American had traded ambition for devotion, his hands now adept at soothing cries rather than signing deals. Naomi, a Black American software engineer and mother to their 4 children, sat inside, her dark curls loose, sketching plans for her nonprofit to mentor underrepresented coders. Their bond, rebuilt through sleepless nights and shared victories, had grown strong, but Ethan wanted more. Not just a partnership, but a promise to last a lifetime. The apartment, though cramped, was a sanctuary. 4 cribs crowded the living room, toys scattered like confetti, and high chairs stood ready for the baby's first birthday. The quadruplets were joyful chaos, Lila toddling, Isaiah babbling dada, Zoe smearing mashed fruit, Caleb watching quietly. Ethan and Naomi had mastered their rhythm, but the grind was relentless. Naomi's postpartum fatigue lingered, her nights split between coding and soothing fevers. As a Black woman, she'd endured whispers about her unconventional family, but Ethan's steady presence, changing diapers, brewing coffee, had quieted the noise. Their love, once fractured, now bloomed in small acts. Naomi's hand on his arm, Ethan's lullabies at midnight. Ethan's world had shifted. Caldwell Innovations stabilized under his remote leadership, but his focus remained on the family. The tech world still buzzed. Some lauded his choice, others mocked it. But Ethan ignored the noise, his heart anchored to the baby's giggles. Naomi, too, was finding her stride, her nonprofit taking shape with seed funding from Ethan's trust. Her independence, hard-won through years of solitude, was now a strength they shared. Yet, doubts lingered. One night, as they washed bottles, Naomi said, "I'm scared to need you, Ethan. What if this is too good to last?" He touched her cheek, his voice soft. "Then, we'll keep making it real every day." The first birthday loomed, a milestone Ethan saw as a chance. He planned quietly, enlisting Claire, his assistant, to organize a small celebration, balloons, cupcakes, and close friends. As the babies slept the evening before, Ethan led Naomi to the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. He knelt, opening the velvet box to reveal a simple gold ring, its elegance mirroring her strength. "Naomi, I don't need a title or a tower to know what matters," he said, his voice steady. "I want to build a life with you, not because of the kids, but because I love you. Will you marry me?" Naomi's breath caught, her eyes glistening. She nodded, whispering, "Yes," her hand trembling as he slipped the ring on. Their wedding was intimate, held in the apartment's backyard under a willow tree. Friends and neighbors gathered their warmth, contrasting the media's scrutiny. Naomi wore a flowing dress, her curls adorned with flowers. Ethan, in jeans and a linen shirt, held Caleb as they exchanged vows. Ethan said, "I promise to show up, listen, and love you through every mess." Naomi, her voice clear, replied, "I promise to trust, grow with you, and build us forever." In tiny outfits, the quadruplets toddled around, Lila tugging at Naomi's hem and Isaiah giggling in a neighbor's arms. Laughter drowned out the words, but the vows sank deep, a pledge forged in their shared journey. The community embraced them. Ms. Lena, the hospital nurse, brought a quilt stitched with the baby's initials, her eyes proud. Neighbors, once skeptical, toasted their union, their acceptance a balm for Naomi's past isolation. The tech world took note. A blog post about the billionaire's backyard wedding went viral, sparking debates about love versus legacy. Ethan and Naomi ignored it, their focus on the baby's cupcake-smeared faces and each other's quiet smiles. As a Black woman and a white man, their union was a statement, but to them, it was simply home. Challenges persisted. The baby's first colds hit hard, testing their stamina. Naomi's nonprofit faced funding hurdles, and Ethan juggled boardroom calls during nap times. But they faced it together. Their fights, over schedules and priorities, ending in apologies and tighter hugs. One night, as they tucked the babies in, Naomi leaned against Ethan, her ring glinting. "This is us now," she said, her voice warm. Ethan kissed her forehead. "Always." The apartment, alive with the baby's breaths, held their new legacy, not of wealth, but of love, chosen daily. As stars emerged, Ethan and Naomi stood hand in hand, ready for the final steps of their journey together. The autumn breeze rustled through the willow tree in the backyard of Ethan and Naomi Caldwell's new Boston home, a sunlit space with room for strollers and dreams. Ethan, once a tech billionaire defined by skyscrapers, now pushed a swing where Lila, one of their quadruplets, squealed with delight. A year into fatherhood, the 34-year-old white American had traded boardroom battles for bedtime stories, his jeans grass-stained, his blue eyes alive with purpose. Naomi, a black American software engineer, and mother to Lila, Isaiah, Zoe, and Caleb, stood nearby, her dark curls glowing in the sunlight, her smile a testament to a peace hard-won. Sealed in a simple backyard ceremony, their marriage had woven their lives into a tapestry of love, resilience, and daily choice. A legacy far greater than any empire. The new house, a modest two-story with earthy tones chosen by Naomi, was a far cry from Ethan's old penthouse. 4 high chairs lined the kitchen, toys littered the floors, and crayon scribbles adorned the walls. A chaotic canvas of their life with 1-year-olds. The quadruplets were a whirlwind. Lila's fearless toddling, Isaiah's first words, Mama and Dada, Zoe's love for splashing in puddles, and Caleb's quiet fascination with stacking blocks. Parenting was a marathon, with sleepless nights and tantrums testing their stamina. When Zoe caught a stomach bug, Ethan and Naomi took turns cleaning, their exhaustion tempered by shared glances and tired laughter. "We're still standing," Naomi said, wiping her brow. Ethan kissed her hand. "Together." Naomi blossomed, and her nonprofit for underrepresented coders gained traction. Seed funding from Ethan's trust gave her freedom, but her vision, mentoring young Black and minority programmers, drove her. As a Black woman, she'd faced skepticism in tech, but now her work was a beacon, inspiring articles and community support. Ethan, too, had redefined success. Caldwell Innovations thrived under his part-time leadership, with delegated roles stabilizing the company. He ignored the occasional jab from tech blogs, billionaire turned diaper changer, focusing instead on Isaiah's giggle or Caleb's sleepy cuddle. Their interracial family, once a topic of neighborhood gossip, was now embraced, with neighbors dropping off homemade pies and Ms. Lena, the hospital nurse, visiting to cheer Naomi's nonprofit. Challenges remained. The quadruplets' first steps brought falls and tears, and Naomi's nonprofit faced bureaucratic hurdles. Ethan juggled board calls during naps, and his patience stretched thin when Lila smeared oatmeal on his laptop. Arguments flared over missed doctor appointments or Naomi's late-night coding, but they resolved them with apologies and hugs, their love stronger for it. One evening, as they sat under the willow tree, Naomi spoke, her voice soft. She said, "I never asked you why you stayed watching Zoe chase a butterfly." Ethan looked at her, his heart full. "Because I was lost without you. You and the kids. You're my home." Naomi's eyes glistened as she journeyed from solitude to trust completely. She'd once feared Ethan's return was temporary, a billionaire's whim, but his presence, through fevers, tantrums, and quiet nights, had proven her wrong. She leaned against him, her ring glinting. "I used to think love meant losing myself," she said. "Now I know it means finding us." Ethan pulled her close, their children tumbling through the grass like tiny stars. The world outside buzzed. Tech panels debating Ethan's choices, social media praising their story, but it faded against the laughter of their family. One sunny afternoon, Ethan sat sketching under the willow tree, the quadruplets playing nearby. His pencil traced their figures: Lila's curls, Isaiah's grin, labeled, "My Forever." Naomi peeked over his shoulder, her smile warm. "Your best work yet," she teased. Ethan chuckled. "It's better than any code." Later, as they tucked the babies in, Naomi touched his arm. "You didn't miss this," she said, her voice thick. "You chose it." Ethan nodded, his throat tight, watching their children's chests rise and fall, their arms tangled in sleep. Their life wasn't perfect. Spills happened, deadlines loomed, and the baby's chaos was relentless. But love held it together, an invisible thread woven through every cry, every laugh. Ethan, once driven by applause, now lived for Caleb's sleepy hug. Naomi, once guarded, glowed with a peace that lit their home. Their story, black and white, ambition and sacrifice, had reshaped tech and community narratives, where neighbors saw love beyond labels. As autumn leaves fell, Ethan and Naomi stood in their backyard, hands entwined, their children's laughter echoing. This was their legacy, not of wealth, but of presence, a life built on showing up daily,